Meeting number 35 of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, pursuant to House Order of June 23, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room as well as remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. First of all, kindly wait till you've been recognized before you speak. And for those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. I should also add that the clerk has asked that, to the extent possible, we use our earpieces because we are experiencing some problems hearing everyone. Now, interpretation for those on Zoom is at the bottom of your screen, and you have a choice of either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motions adopted by the committee on Monday, January 31st, 2022, and Wednesday, October 19th, 2022, the committee resumes its study of the current situation in Haiti. It is now my pleasure to welcome our witnesses. From the Embassy of the Republic of Haiti, we have His Excellency Dr. Arthis, the Ambassador of the Republic of Haiti to Canada. Joining the Ambassador are Mr. O.C. Aristide, the Minister Counselor at the Embassy here, as well as Mr. Nesli Numa, the Minister Counselor as well. Now, Mr. Ambassador, you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open it to the members to ask you questions. And once you only have a minute left in your opening remarks, I will put this up as a signal that you should be wrapping it up within the allotted time. Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, it is with great pleasure that I've accepted your invitation to appear before you today to speak about the worrying situation in Haiti today. First off, I'd like to commend you and thank you for your interest in my country. As you know, the reality on the ground is difficult. The violence orchestrated by armed gangs is blockading the country and plunging millions of Haitians, men and women alike, into an acute humanitarian crisis. The violence began some time ago and reached a heinous level with the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse on July 7, 2021. Since then, robbery, rape, and kidnapping have become part of the daily life of Haitians. For 2 months now, Haiti has been at a virtual standstill. The blockades by gangs of the country's main terminal prevents the distribution of fuel throughout the country. The start of the school year for the current academic year has actually not yet taken place. That is more than 2.4 million children that have not yet been able to return to their classrooms. They've been on lockdown and these schools have been closed since June 2022. 4.7 million people, nearly half the population, are experiencing high levels of food insecurity. In the wake of all this, the cholera epidemic has resurfaced, already claiming some 50 lives. It is in this context that the Haitian government has appealed to the international community for help, inviting the deployment of a specialized armed force to deal with this security and humanitarian crisis. It's no secret that Canada is very well positioned to lead what could be an international force that could be deployed in Haiti to help the authorities respond to this immediate security need. This is a relief because Canada, should be noted, is one of the partners that enjoys a very prestigious reputation in Haiti and has already chaired several international meetings on Haiti during this year. The interest that Canada and Canadians have in Haiti is unquestionable. Yes, there is a debate about sending a military force to Haiti. First, in the mind of any Haitian, a foreign force is never welcome in Haiti. This actually has been indicated since the first constitution. The Prime Minister himself has long publicly dismissed the idea of requesting international military assistance for Haiti. In addition, one must note that previous missions have left a lot of bad memories. I therefore see an opportunity, not the happiest, but an opportunity nonetheless to activate Canadian solidarity with Haiti. However, this solidarity must not focus solely on security issues. It must extend to construction or reconstruction projects in the country. It can be an opportunity to help Haiti address certain major challenges that generate the recurring problem of instability. For example, within a Canadian military mission, in addition to soldiers and other equipment, it would be nice to have a contingent of military engineers and construction materials. Makes no sense that the Haitian capital has not yet been rebuilt 12 years after the 2010 earthquake. Canada has a great corps of engineers that could help with this. Another thing we need to learn from the past is that democracy is not only about well-functioning institutions. It has its corollaries, including justice, anti-corruption, and accountability. Another fundamental element is the economy. More than 80% of Haitian youth between the ages of 18 and 30 do not work. Their only way out is either immigration or gangs or politics. I call on Canada to help put our youth to work. Humanitarian aid has never helped rebuild a country. Haitians will not recover with charity. They need help to get to work and earn a living with dignity. This obviously requires a huge investment, but more importantly, a greater willingness to do something sustainable to help Haiti. At the end of the day, Haitians like myself would be happy to hear Canada say, when we started our mission in Haiti, 60% of women did not have access to health care, but our engineers worked and the number was reduced to 12%. Or unemployment, which mainly affects women and forces young girls into prostitution, has been reduced to a significantly rather. In addition to saying, obviously, there's an elected president, the parliament is well functioning, the police has regained its strength, etc. To conclude, Mr. President, I'll be 49 years old next week. Since I entered high school in 1985, I have never known 7 years of stability in Haiti, 2 major military interventions, and a dozen UN missions since 1994. That's what we've had. We are definitely approaching a third mission. If the international community in Canada in particular wants to help in a way that ensures that we will not be back in Haiti in 5 to 7 years for a new military operation, we must not only address the security problems now, but we must also help to build the infrastructure and the economy of Haiti. This will contribute to Canada's prestige. It will help Haiti recover. It will give hope to other vulnerable people who look to the more developed countries for a better tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excellency, we will now open it up to questions. And the first member is MP Hoback. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Just waiting for my mic to come on here. Does that work? Can you hear me okay? First of all, thank you, Your Excellency, for being here and giving us some insight into the what's happening on the ground in Haiti right now. It sounds like it's a dire situation. Can you kind of give me a sense of what type of violence we're facing here? Is it based off gangs or criminals or cartels, or is it politically related? Can you give me a little more in-depth on exactly what that looks like?
C'est un peu complexe. Il y a plusieurs ramifications. Il y a certainement.
It is complex. There are several aspects of it. Studies have been conducted in Haiti. Politics have not always been an instrument to serve the population. It's often something of power, prestige, corruption. These things are noted or known. Gangs, young the people that are in gangs are poor people. They're not rich. They don't have the option to go in abroad to buy these weapons. So there's an economic aspect as well. All these gangs, where they exist, then there's all this trafficking that also happens, or illicit operations. Sometimes the weapons the police discovers amongst the gangs come from other places. So there are various factors, economic, political. But as I said, one of the important factors that means that this is a recurring problem, something that hasn't been addressed, is the economic factor for these very vulnerable young people.
What's the impact in the Dominican Republic next door? Are we seeing lots of refugees fleeing Haiti, going to Dominican Republic, and what's the relationship like there?
Les relations avec la République dominicaine,
The relationship with the Dominican Republic has always been a bit complicated. These are neighbors who, are both close and distant in a way, and we know that what happens in Haiti does have an influence on what happens in the Dominican Republic. But it is also true that part of the gangs is weaponized or has links with the other gangs in the Dominican Republic. The only concern is that the Dominican Republic has a much stronger, more well-organized state, a country that is under control. So Haiti is actually taking much of the hit. I know that Dominican Republic receives many migrants from Haiti because of the situation. So the situation is internal, but also spills over regionally.
That's in regards to your request for help.
et pour le moment, je sais que la question
For the time being, I know the matter is under study. There was also at OAS and at the United Nations, there was talk of sanctions that would be targeted. As to the Prime Minister, we're still waiting.
So as far as sanctions, how would you target sanctions in a country such as Haiti?
et c'est à la fois compliqué.
It's complicated and not. It's complicated in the sense that gangs, as I've said, those people who have the weapons are young people, poor people, very vulnerable. Now, it would be important to find out who is giving them these weapons, who's buying these weapons internationally to bring these global weapons into Haiti and benefit from kidnapping. Kidnapping is a flourishing business. We're talking of tens of thousands of dollars for each kidnapped individual. That money goes somewhere. Some countries, like Canada, should take a look at what is going on. Sometimes think, okay, corruption happens in Haiti, and then these people will leave, go to Canada or the U.S. to hide. It's important internationally for other global partners to look at this. Canada, at least, could look at what's happening at home and sanction those people who come to these countries to hide. Sanctioning the gangs is one important thing, but it's not sufficient. They're not the only ones.
How would you go about identifying who these persons are? Because if they're coming into Canada, I want to know about it. I want to make sure that they're not bringing their illegal activity with them. So have you put together, I guess maybe my question is more like, what is existing right now for infrastructure for a police force or military to try to bring back the rule of law?
C'est très difficile pour la police.
It's very difficult for the police, insofar as sometimes the gangs are better, they have more equipment, more weaponry than the police. The police deals with a lot of internal strife trying to address this issue. Much effort is done out in the field, but of course not enough. Otherwise, we wouldn't be at this point here today. There needs to be consistency, regardless of how international cooperation translates in real time, support from Canada, etc. There needs to be consistent help work with the Haitian National Police so that the guilty parties are identified, these individuals be identified, recognized, and sanctioned?
You talked a little bit about reconstruction. I guess my next colleague will ask those questions.
Merci.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Hoback. We now go to Mr. Dubourg. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Son Excellence.
Your Excellency and guests, welcome to this committee.
Non, m'a dit nos sacs passés. Avant d'aller plus loin,
Before I go any further, Your Excellency, I'd like, through you, to express my condolences to the families of Mika Bell, this young, talented artist who died so suddenly, and it really affected us. Given the fact that I only have a few moments, actually 6 minutes, I'm told, Your Excellency, I'd like to ask you some questions and get some very brief answers, if possible. If these questions, as a diplomat, you find you're uncomfortable with, then just don't hesitate to tell me, next question. My first question is this. When the Haitian government made this request, is that not actually admitting a failure of the government to direct its own country?
Prochaine question.
Next question. Thank you. Second question, Ambassador. We know that armed gangs are financed by the economic elite in part and politicians. In your opening speech, you asked a question, in fact, and you know that Canada is prepared to impose sanctions. My question is the following. Politicians, those politicians we're referring to that we would like to sanction, should the Canadian government look at prior government politicians, including the current government, to look for those corrupt politicians that are financing these gangs in Haiti? The answer to that is clear. All of those people who finance these gangs need to be sanctioned. As a Haitian myself, I have been heartbroken by the loss of families, colleagues, parents, family members even, the death of these people. This is personal. Knowing, at least that the next generation, that there would be some example that would be set so that the next generation would know that the international community, that Canada, is not going to just play around here. And when there is any weakness on the part of the Haitian justice system, it's known. Many studies have been done on this. But the international community, Canada specifically, can take up the baton and say, we're not going to play that game. This cannot go unpunished. Whether it's prior politicians today, I'm certain that all the people involved should be sanctioned. Thank you for your answer. Your Excellency, Haitians can't seem to sit down to come to an agreement. Mélanie Joly, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, asked the Prime Minister about this. There are a number of agreements going around, and there are even people who are leading these types of works that are resigning. So the impression we get is that all of these agreements that are being talked about in Haiti is essentially to replace the Prime Minister or the President. There is no credible plan to pull Haiti out of the current crisis. How could I put this? I would add that these various agreements aim for power without going through elections. So why ask for international assistance if there's no consensus among leaders within the community, the leadership community in Haiti? At this point, I have to recognize that I am quite disappointed to see that after all this time, there can be no political consensus in my country. It's an obligation, I think. I think Canada is good is doing the right thing in the sense of pressing Haitians to have some kind of consensus. I know that when it comes to the government, a number of efforts were made to try to bring these groups together to come to an agreement. Perhaps it will require far more time than we expected, but I remain hopeful. I mean, I'm not a dreamer, but I do have hope that at the end of the day, we'll come to an agreement amongst Haitians to say, okay, this is what we want, and to what extent we would want the international community in Canada to help us. Thank you. I don't think I have much more time than for one question. If there were military intervention through any force in Haiti, I'd like to know briefly what your position is. I think you've said it, but specifically, I'd like to know what difficulty this force, what challenges this force will face on the ground. The main difficulty will be acceptance, as I said. There have been debates on this issue. The debates are practically legitimate, really, because look at the history of Haiti. Look at the experience the country has had with international forces in the past. That's the first aspect. I'm not an expert in security, but from a security standpoint, there's a challenge. Identify the gangs, get into those neighborhoods to lead an operation, operations that might be challenging. That's why it's important to cooperate with the police. But the major challenge to my mind is that let's just say that I hope that in 5 to 7 years from now, the Foreign Affairs Committee of Canada does not have to once again sit to discuss Haiti and to once again discuss the crisis and the security issue here. I fully agree with the Canadian strategy to find a plan. I'm happy there is a mission that went to Haiti last week and came back with important findings and recommendations. I hope that based on those recommendations, there can be a plan that is credible and that is designed to, you won't have all Haitians on board, but that makes sense. But to have a comfortable majority of Haitians to understand and accept the assistance that is required, necessary from the international community, Canada specifically. Thank you.
To Monsieur Bergeron, you have 6 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Alors, rebonjour, Excellence.
Hello again, Excellency. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your colleague's presence as well. So far, your comments have been quite enlightening for the members of this committee. I'll be honest with you, each and every one of us have received numerous messages. People are saying, we've got to go. And other people saying, no, you really shouldn't go. If there were to be one lesson learned from all prior experience, one thing we know is that we went to Haiti having some impression that we knew what we needed to do, and yet we've never managed to improve the situation as we see today. One of the concerns we currently have is to make sure Haitians are involved so that the project, if you will, the solution, what will actually be implemented will be inspired by Haitians themselves. And the challenge we're having with the diaspora in Quebec and Canada that are actually telling us to support a mission or to oppose a mission, this is all leading us to a situation where we actually don't know whom we're speaking to. There is a government at Port-au-Prince that does not have any control over the territory, as you were saying, for the reasons you mentioned, a government whose legitimacy is highly at issue, in doubt. And without any other interlocutor, we have to look at this request, while at the same time we have this diaspora in Quebec and in Canada saying, on the one hand, yes, go ahead, and on the other, no, don't go. without having someone we can speak to, how can we be sure that the request made by the Haitian government actually reflects what Haitians want to see happen? You refer to bad memories, Your Excellency, and I can fully understand that. These bad memories that Haitians are still experiencing today from their history. How can we be assured of the fact that the request made by the Haitian government actually meets that need from that the Haitians actually feel that they have? Have there been polls, consultations? But again, there's no control over the territory, and I think that's probably the reason why there's been this request issued. But you see the position we find ourselves in, Your Excellency. And without having a counterpart, how can we be sure Haitians will be involved?
Je suis tout à
I fully agree. That this is a question that needs to be addressed, and it's difficult to do because consensus is challenging. Now, as far as having a counterpart, someone to speak to, as I said a few years ago, I must recognize that in Haiti, we don't find ourselves in a situation that is fully constitutional, but we do have a government in place. We do have a prime minister. He is recognized internationally. He took part in international summits and congresses and has spoken to the United Nations Security Council, or Secretary General, rather, in a number of governments, including the Prime Minister of Canada. Second, the situation in Haiti speaks for itself. Canadian media, who have their Haitian correspondents, really explain the situation quite clearly. It is a desperate situation that really calls for a solution. Of course, I agree. The shape that takes, and this notion of having a unanimous voice, that's not yet the case. That's why the dialogue between Haitians that's currently ongoing, to try to get to some minimal level of consensus, even if it's not broad on what needs to happen to the country. But even if there was minimal consensus on this issue, this important issue, well, I'm happy that Canada sent a mission to Haiti. I've heard positive comments about this. There were a number of people from the opposition side, the government side, civil society, that met with this group from Canada. I believe that in a couple of weeks, there could be something clear, almost neutral, that could come from this Canadian commission to Haiti. Your Excellency, this international force, and this week it was mentioned on Monday, I believe there are negotiations underway under the aegis of Canada, Mexico.
Out of time, so if you can make it very quick, please.
Oui. Alors,
Yes. Briefly, Your Excellency, if this force were to be organized, how can we be sure that it takes into consideration the lessons learned, what should be the mandate, the terms of reference, and the timeline the government of Haiti would like this international force to have if, of course, it actually turns out to be implemented? The lessons have been learned. There have been mistakes made. They shouldn't be made again. Now, when it comes to discipline, deployment, but as I've said, one of the important aspects that could allow for some degree of legitimacy, strong legitimacy, is this. You'll have this force, regardless of its name, its composition, it's in Haiti. It really starts to get to work in parallel with what's happening in terms of security. There's work that's being done for construction, reconstruction. It's very important for us in Haiti now. We haven't gotten over the earthquake yet. I believe that in 2 or 3 weeks, quickly, people would see results, would see the work underway, and could understand that the person coming from abroad to Haiti is not just there to humiliate us, not just there for imperialistic reasons, but really to help. I think that's really important.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. We now go to Ms. McPherson, please. You have 6 minutes, Ms. McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would like to thank His Excellency for being here with us. This has been a very interesting conversation, and my colleagues have asked some very important questions, and you've provided some very important information to us. I also want to express, I know others have as well, but I do want to express my condolences to what is happening in Haiti. And I hear from the ambassador, from His Excellency, how this is impacting him, but in fact, all people in Haiti and all of the diaspora communities in Canada with ties to Haiti. Obviously, this is a horrific time, and all of us in this room are trying to find the best way forward to support Haitians at this time. And so I am going to ask on a variety of different areas, but I'm going to start with, I think, the political crisis. So Ambassador, we know that Haiti has not held elections for several years. We know that the Prime Minister is unelected. You spoke about other countries recognizing the Prime Minister, but the reality is he is an unelected leader. What discussions is the Prime Minister having with opposition parties, with civil society? Perhaps you could note the people behind the Montana Accord. What are the possible avenues for transition to a provisional government and subsequent elections?
Ce que je peux dire,
What I can tell you is there's no constitutional answer to the situation, if I may say, which is a situation that is not commonplace. Again, the issue of negotiations, political negotiations is at play. Political actors, people who have political parties and are in politics, including Montana Group and other groups. There are a number of groups out there that have appeared over the last little while. It's really up to them to get together and see how to organize something. Unfortunately, from where I stand, I don't unfortunately have the answer, and I myself am waiting for the leaders in Haiti to do something in this direction.
So the Prime Minister is not playing a role in finding a resolution. That's not happening at the moment.
Premier Ministre,
How can I put this? Even since last year, the Prime Minister is in negotiations with various parties. In fact, the current government is born of a coalition, the fruit of an agreement that was signed last September. But there are other parties that are not part of this government. I know there are many negotiations and agreements that were between the Prime Minister and the Montana Group directly, and other talks underway between the Prime Minister and other groups. Now, with respect to the government and the Prime Minister specifically, I know he is trying to make efforts to have more people around a consensus on Haiti. Where is the bottleneck? Why can't we come to a solution? That's the answer I don't have for you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And I think I'll turn to human rights now, if I can. It probably won't surprise very many people in this room that human rights are, of course, very, very important to me. I was just reading, actually, a 2021 Harvard Law School International Human Rights Clinic article that was called "Killing with Impunity." And it talked about the fact that in Haiti over the past several years, human rights organizations have reported serious allegations, including massacres of civilians, corruption, targeting of political demonstrators and opposition members, and that some of these abuses were allegedly perpetrated by the government or the police. Can you talk about the work that your government is doing to combat the corruption and what avenues for justice these victims of abuse have?
c'est une situation.
As I've said, we're in an extremely, extremely tough situation where even the effort made in the past, it's almost as though all that is for naught. We're losing these benefits that we've had with the police and other groups. I know Canada, for one, has spent a lot of money on supporting some aspects, including making the justice system work, etc. It's almost as though we're losing all those years of work that were achieved at some point. I can tell you this: it's hard when it comes to justice. It's been almost a year now without courts in Port-au-Prince, because we're the main court in Haiti, or actually the court in Port-au-Prince was assailed by gangs. It's a really challenging situation, not only in terms of security, but also when it comes to human rights and justice. It's complicated.
And do you feel, I mean, I hear the frustration in your voice, certainly, and I know you've spoken about the need for reconstruction, you've spoken about the need for an economy that works, you've spoken about justice and accountability. Do you think there is a way through this current crisis if there is not mechanisms in place to provide justice for people in Haiti at this time?
Non, je ne crois pas qu'on pourrait.
No, I don't think we'll be able to go forward without justice. I don't think we can move forward with people being accountable, without people being sanctioned. But that's not all. We also cannot move forward without making sure that the next generation does not have to go through this again. Our young Haitians, my cousins, my brothers, who are between 18 and 30, they need to find something to do and shouldn't not be prey to these gangs. This is a very complex agenda. But this is an agenda that includes all of the elements that I've just raised.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, that's I think my time.
Yes, it is. You were over. Thank you, though. We now go to the next round. Each member will have 3 minutes for their question, and we start with Mr. Epp, who's joining us virtually.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you to your councillors for joining us today, and thank you for sharing your experience as well. My initial questions will come informed by one of my staff who is a member of the Haitian diaspora. And so she recalls that in the early 90s, she actually still has family presently in Haiti, that Canada helped to train police officers in 2004. And as you mentioned, Canada had peacekeepers on the ground in Haiti. So, and your government is calling for additional external forces. What is the reception from the Haitian police from external forces? What would you anticipate that reception to be?
I do not have the answer to that. No, I don't. There really is not a poll or a study that's been conducted to tell you what the police's reaction would be, but I can anticipate, given the fact the situation is complicated, a number of police officers have been assassinated in recent times. I can anticipate that potentially international help to support police action would be welcome, from the police, that is.
Thank you. Given that situation, what would be your advice? What would be the process of having external forces versus internal forces, identifying for lack of a better term, the bad actors? How do external forces then, determine how to help or who to target for sanctions or other measures domestically in Haiti?
The first issue is weapons. Gangs have weapons that are more highly performing than the police. And then training. One thing people don't mention is that many Haitians have left the country, including many police officers from specialized forces that received support from Canada, financial support, and that leaves a gap. Of course, when you have a country with this high level of violence, I'll say it, there is some involvement within the security forces in the country. It's been proven elsewhere. Haiti cannot be an exception to this, and it's for all of these reasons that, when we talk about economic interests, political interests, when we talk about various interests as a whole, we know that forces would be interested in protecting their interests, and this is why international cooperation is important. Again, I'm not sure that forces can come in and do the police's work. I'm not sure that's what the government is asking for, but some accompaniment or assistance from the international community when it comes to the police, and to really get past this real crisis from a security standpoint, political, economic problem that it is. We won't be able to get out of this unless we get support from outside.
Thank you. Given, the $1.8 billion fee that Canada
Mr.
has
App?
flowed. Yes.
Mr. App, you're well over your 3 minutes. If we could go to Mr. Zuberi, please. 3 minutes, Mr. Zuberi.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et je veux...
Thank you. I'll be sharing my time with my colleague, Rachel Bandayan. Thank you for being here, Ambassador. I have a significant Haitian community in my riding. I'm sure that Canadian and Quebec citizens are extremely interested in your testimony here today. I'd like to know, you talked about solutions somewhat. Could you tell us a little bit more about solutions that are led by Haitians and how Canada can help that come to fruition? What's important as far as lessons learned is that over the last 20 years, Haiti has been fertile ground for NGOs. I'm not against humanitarian assistance, but I would say this. Charity, humanitarian aid, is not what's going to help Haiti recover. To recover over the long term, Haiti will need to focus on the economy. There will be a need for a lot of money. This is not something that Canada can do alone. Canada can seek out other partners for this, but we're in a position we should not be afraid of saying the truth. We have a country here that is not only destroyed from a security standpoint, it doesn't work on an economic standpoint, from an economic standpoint either. This is a country where infrastructure doesn't exist. Since the earthquake, schools, even the Port-au-Prince Cathedral has not been rebuilt. The Palais National has not been rebuilt. I'm not asking Canada to rebuild this, but that's just one example to show the state of things. At least you can see to what extent the country still is in this situation 12 years after this earthquake. These are potential solutions. Thank you. Rachel Bandayan. Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you for being here. I have several thousands of Haitians in my community in Montreal who are worried about the situation in Haiti, of course. And as you certainly know, the Prime Minister is currently sitting down with the ministers involved to discuss the situation in Haiti. So your presence on the Hill today is both important for our government and just as important for our government. I have a question to you based on the United Nations report on sexual violence and the rapes in Haiti currently. Sexual violence is used as a war instrument. Young girls and women in Haiti are victims, of course. I'd like to understand how you perceive the situation in Haiti and in what way Canada could help women in Haiti. The situation is very complicated for women. Even from a personal standpoint, I have a very close relative who was kidnapped early September. But that is part of the daily life of Haitians. I have a cousin who lives in a certain area, and she sends voice memos saying, you know, I have to leave right now because rape is a tool that is being used by the gangs. Again, how to help, in what form, how to help these women. It gets back to what I've already said. At least have a very clear plan on the way in which one can help. You're raising the important point of having a plan. Do you have the impression that there is a plan, that if Canada were to assist, that there would be a plan?
You're very much over your time period.
Désolé, Monsieur le Président.
Very much so. Thank you. So we now go to Mr. Bergeron. A minute and a half, please, Mr. Bergeron.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You raised the fact that armed gangs are better equipped, actually, than the police, the Haitian National Police. On October 15th, Canadian and American military aircraft brought security equipment to Port-au-Prince, including tactical and armored vehicles and other supplies. I understand that's not sufficient and that there needs to be an international force to actually address this issue of their armed gangs. I know that, for instance, yesterday, this equipment was used by the police. And the police led an operation in Pernier, which is in the east of Port-au-Prince. So efforts are made on the ground. I recognize the police is really trying very hard on the ground, but it just so happens the situation is as it is. The efforts are huge, but even then, not sufficient.
Ça revient à dire.
So that is to say that even though the Haitian government has bought this equipment to deal with these criminal gangs, it's not enough. There really will need to be support from the international community to that effect. Some other equipment has not yet been delivered, so perhaps we'll have to wait for that equipment to arrive to see. Perhaps to rethink the National Police's new strategy to see where things stand. On that, I have no details as to when the equipment will be delivered, nor to what extent once the equipment will be there on the ground. And quickly, to get back to what Madame Bendayan was just saying, if there were to be a force, is there a plan?
Mr. Bergeron, we are now well over a minute and a half. If I could ask all members, please, we are considerably over time, and everyone is going over their time limit. So just out of courtesy for our colleagues, please, if we could just stick to the time limits to the best of our abilities, please.
There's no harm in question of privilege.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, Chair, I'd like to know, I think that we all have a lot of questions, and we are learning a lot with the excellence of the testimony of the ambassador. So I'd like to know if we can send to you questions in order to send to the ambassador, and maybe he will reply to the clerk. It will help a lot for a report on Haiti.
Absolutely. I don't see any problems. Is that acceptable, Mr. Ambassador? That if we do forward questions, if you could kindly send them back to us?
Oui, bien sûr, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, of course, Mr. Chair. It would be a great pleasure.
Indeed. We now go to Ms. McPherson. You have a minute and a half, Ms. McPherson.
I will be very close to that minute and a half,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair. I have heard you. Mr. Ambassador, again, thank you very much for being here. And it has, as my colleague has stated, it's been very, very interesting. you talk about the need to rebuild, the need to be there, and from what I'm hearing from you, it is that commitment to long-term, predictable funding that would be most beneficial to Haiti as Haiti rebuilds its country. Is that accurate?
Yes, long term, yes. But the guarantee I can provide is this: the elected representatives who have large Haitian communities in their ridings can also provide the same guarantee I have. We have a diaspora here in Canada that is also prepared to cooperate and invest and work in Haiti. In other words, Canada would not be on its own in its effort to reconstruct or rebuild the Haitian economy, to invest in the country. I'm sure the Haitian diaspora here in Canada, in Montreal, elsewhere throughout the country, is just waiting for the right time to also invest in Haiti.
Thank you. And I have 10 seconds left, but I will say that something that I've always struggled with is our inability as a country to be there for the long term. So I would be urging Canada to have that predictable long-term funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McPherson. You're the first person who has actually managed to do it within the prescribed time limit. Thank you. We now go to Mr. Abou-Taif. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Ambassador, for being here today. Quick question. Haiti has one border, one country, like one neighbor, and surrounded by water. We have gangs that on the street killing people and causing unrest. And I know that you've alluded that the economic situation is one big factor in what's happening in the country. But the question is, who's helping or supporting these gangs, and who's giving them or backing them with the weapons? And they must be getting some support from outside. If you advise us on this, would be great.
La police haïtienne.
The Haitian police has made a number of arrests, the American police as well. Unfortunately, many weapons have arrived through Haitians acting in bad faith, coming to the country with their weapons. It's a problem not only for Haiti, it's a problem for the entire Caribbean. The ease with which people can access weapons in the U.S., for instance, that's a well-known fact. This has consequences for Haiti. And then it becomes a business. People buy the weapons in the U.S. and sell it 10 times more expensive in Haiti. This is setting aside the contraband, the sales through gangs and other groups in the region. So it is complex. And to get back to your question about sanctions, we need to find those people who are exporting weapons to Haiti, these weapons that are killing people.
How successful been the government at least identifying those people so they can be tracked or traced, and then they can be put accountable, at least to somehow minimize their effect? It may not be the end of the story, but at least to put some control over the situation.
I don't really have the police reports to know exactly who is involved, to know what exact investigation has taken place. But the names exist. There have been arrests. Gangs are known. So really, it's up to the police to do its work, to arrest them, interrogate them, and then do what's required. It's not easy, otherwise it would have already been done. But this is something that needs to be done. At this point, I don't, of course, have a list of all the people involved in this situation in Haiti.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abou-Taif. And our last question goes to Mr. Dubourg. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you so much, Chair. And d'abord,
first off, Ambassador, listen, just like you, I ardently hope that Haiti can once again become Haïti chérie, dear Haiti. I left the country when I was 15, and I'm very close to. I follow the situation in Haiti closely. I have a two-part question. First off, in the request made by Prime Minister Henry, there's no timeline. I'm not sure if you've heard of one. And often, this is the other side. There's, the Haitian leads, the Haitian solution, and people say that in Haiti there's oil, there are minerals, and that's why the international community is always trying to get involved in Haiti. What can you tell us about that when it comes to these hidden resources in the underground? Honestly, it's not my area of expertise. I can't really comment, but I laugh every time someone tells me that there are hidden resources hidden somewhere in Haiti. Ambassador, the request made by the Prime Minister was issued on October 6th, and it's been almost a month. Are you concerned that other criminal groups, internally, domestically, or abroad, may decide to take control of the government, the Palais National, and lead to a worsening of this terrible situation? Is that even possible, sir? It's really difficult. It's really difficult. That's the worst case scenario, if you will. But we already find ourselves in a complicated, catastrophic situation. I certainly hope that we will not need to experience anything of the sort. But what we are already experiencing now is already difficult. A final question, Ambassador. You've been here for a while. You know that we have an electoral system here in the country called Elections Canada. Yes, within a democratic country, we would like there to be elections. There's some talk of an intervention here. What is the electoral system in place in Haiti? How would it work? There is a system. It's hyper complicated. Mr. Chair, we might need an entire meeting to explain it. But it's a system whereby there are elections at least every 2 years because you have to change the senators. Senators have 6-year terms, 642 members of the parliament, and mayors have 4-year terms, etc. So basically you have elections every year. And unfortunately, the diaspora has not been involved in the electoral process. Foreign Haitians abroad rather can't stand as candidates, and they can't vote. This is to give you an example of to what extent the process is complex. When we talk about Canada, there's something that I want to add. I've often discussed this with my colleagues. I've been here for 2 years, exactly 2 years. I've seen that there is a Canadian way of doing things. I've seen the discipline. I've seen the dialogue. I've also seen people seeking consensus. I mean, of course, it's politics. It's not easy. Regardless of the solution, Canada will provide for Haiti. Canada is not going to abandon Haiti with or without an intervention. I know Canada is a good partner to Haiti. I hope that this style, this way of doing things that Canada has is also there in the way in which Canada interacts with Haiti. Ambassador, the Prime Minister often says, he uses a typical expression, a Haitian expression, and says that Canada's on the side of and is friends with a Haitian. Thank you very much for your excellent interventions.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you,
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order. Point of order. I think there will be a short break to prepare for the next panel. Perhaps with the agreement of His Excellency, could we show our support by taking a photo with His Excellency, with our entire team?
A very good point to raise. Should the ambassador have no objections, we will certainly do so. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you also to Mr. Aristide and Mr. Numa Your testimony was very, very helpful, as I'm sure you could tell. All of our members are very much interested in focusing on the path forward because we recognize how important it is, how imperative it is that stability return to Haiti. As our member said, that we will see a period, hopefully very soon, where we can refer to Haiti as Haiti chérie, and we can work towards the reconstruction of Haiti. And please, when we do send you the questions, we'd be grateful if you could kindly answer those inquiries and send them back so they are reflected in the study that we're doing in this committee. Thank you. We will now adjourn for a few minutes and also have an opportunity to take, we will suspend to have an opportunity to take a picture with the ambassador and then return to resume our study on extreme flooding in Pakistan. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, September 21st, 2022, the committee resumes its study of the extreme flooding in Pakistan. It is now my pleasure to welcome our two witnesses. First, from International Development and Relief Foundation, we have Ms. Zina Osman, the Director of Giving and Impact. Second, we have a witness from the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and it's a great pleasure to welcome back Ms. Rima Jamos, IMSIS, the representative of the UNHCR in Canada. You will each be provided 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open it to questions by the members. Ms. Osman, please do proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to begin by thanking the committee for allocating some time to talk about the devastating humanitarian crisis unfolding in Pakistan. I'm sure at this point we're all aware of the magnitude of this climate-induced disaster and subsequently Canada's role in providing aid to the people of Pakistan. Since 1984, the International Development and Relief Foundation has provided effective humanitarian aid and sustainable development programs through human dignity, self-reliance, and social justice principles. A Charity Intelligence Top 100 charity, IDRF works in a localization model where the majority of our work internationally is done through reputable local partners to reach the most vulnerable most efficiently. We all know that Pakistan is largely being affected by climate change, but they're not largely responsible for it. As we continue to see more and more extreme weather events around the world like this one, it's a little outrageous that climate change or climate action, I should say, is still being put on the back burner as global emissions of greenhouse gases are still rising, putting all of us everywhere in growing danger. The funding Canada has provided in climate financing is not adequate for these kinds of events that are happening more frequently and where the severity is increasing so rapidly. Will Canada wait until these devastations are our doorstep before we put together a serious plan of action? At the end of August, we wrote an open letter calling on the Government of Canada as a key ally in support of our humanitarian response in Pakistan, where some 30 million people had been impacted by these destructive floods. In line with the humanitarian principle, do no harm, we felt it was necessary to have the Government of Canada provide support to organizations outside of just a few selected humanitarian members of a coalition. Equally important is the commitment to have the greatest impact by providing assistance to the many international organizations that have a strong footprint already in Pakistan. In this open letter, we not only detailed our 30-year-long history working in the region as an international organization, but also highlighting our work in the 2010 Pakistan flood relief, where we were constructing over 1,000 homes, operating maternal health clinics where pregnant women were allocated health benefits, and building over 1,000 water hand pumps to supply fresh water. This was really to outline our strength in this type of disaster relief. Along with many of our peers in the humanitarian space, we invited the government to reconsider their policy of distributing Canadian matching funds through a handful of organizations, as it would directly impact the ability for us to help the most people, and still we were left disappointed. Thankfully, our community of supporters rallied behind us, and we were able to raise $3 million to support the people of Pakistan. A true testament to the reputation and integrity of both our organization and its supporters. The 2010 floods took about 3 years in recovery. It's expected that the recovery from the 2022 floods is going to take more time, since the damages are already climbing up to $10 billion. Coupled with economic instability and inflation, recovery will be even more challenging without adequate funding for these communities. Similar to 2010, we are asking that the government establish a Pakistan Relief Fund in support of continued humanitarian response, providing both immediate and long-term rehabilitation. IDRF is uniquely positioned to be able to access communities through our local network of partners and a robust network of community-based organizations. A key success to our work is our localization model. And it's important that IDRF ensures our projects and programming are relevant, context-specific, and culturally appropriate. We customize our response to the needs of each community. I'll leave it at that and look forward to a thorough discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Osman. We now go to Ms. Jamos Imses. Welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to all the members of the committee. Allow me to take a moment just to set the scene so that we're all working from the same information as we commence this important session. Since June of this year, torrential rains and flash flooding have led to an unprecedented climate disaster in Pakistan, impacting the lives of more than 33 million people. Thousands have been killed and injured, and infrastructure has been damaged or destroyed across the country, including houses, roads, bridges, health facilities, and schools. Widespread damage to agricultural lands and the death of livestock has had a massive impact on sources of food and livelihoods for many, pushing millions deeper into poverty. The flooding has also impeded access to isolated communities, making it difficult for them to find safety and harder for humanitarian actors to reach them with much-needed aid. Close to 8 million people have been forced to flee their homes, with many seeking shelter in relief sites. And while the worst of the floods have receded, conditions in the hardest hit areas where stagnant water remains are deeply concerning. The risk of waterborne diseases threatens millions of people, the majority of whom are women and children. Already, we've seen cases of malaria, dengue fever, and cholera on the rise. Here, it is important to recall that in addition to the Pakistanis who have seen their lives devastated by the floods, the country and its people have generously hosted Afghan refugees for over 4 decades. Over half of the districts declared as calamity hit by the government host an estimated 800,000 Afghan refugees. Pre-existing inequalities exacerbated by the flooding have increased protection concerns, including gender-based violence and child protection risks. And as winter quickly approaches, the millions displaced are in need of urgent assistance to prepare for harsh weather conditions, especially with their ability to cope having already been eroded by soaring inflation and rising food prices even before the rains. Since the onset of the emergency, my organization, the United Nations Refugee Agency, together with local and international humanitarian actors, has been supporting the response led by the government in affected areas with a high concentration of refugees. We've delivered thousands of metric tons of relief supplies, including tents, sleeping mats, blankets, solar-powered lanterns, kitchen sets, mosquito nets, and dignity kits from our stocks in the country and regional warehouses in the United Arab Emirates and Uzbekistan, dispatching over 300 trucks and 23 airlifts. We've also provided cash assistance to the most vulnerable families who've exhausted all other coping mechanisms. Given the colossal scale of the needs, the UN and its humanitarian partners have issued a funding appeal calling on the international community to support the relief efforts. Likewise, my agency has appealed for further financial support to address the mounting needs in areas with high populations of refugees. These appeals are to assist us in meeting immediate life-saving needs, but also include early recovery efforts, such as repairs to homes, health facilities, schools, and water, sanitation, and hygiene systems. Beyond these immediate needs, and with Pakistan on the front lines of the climate emergency, the response plans incorporate prevention and preparedness measures to avert and minimize the effects of extreme weather events in the future, and to help build resilience, particularly amongst the most vulnerable communities, including refugees. Unpredictable weather is likely to further worsen conditions, so investing in sustainable, durable housing and community infrastructure will be key to enhancing preparedness and resilience to future disasters. Since similar rainfall may reoccur in the future, the shelter program will need to adapt building materials to ensure that homes can withstand the rains better than the mud brick structures that prove vulnerable in this emergency. This must also include an expansion of livelihood programs linking climate-smart reconstruction and rehabilitation to the creation of green jobs and an emphasis on the environment. The country and people of Pakistan have so generously welcomed Afghan refugees for over 40 years. We urge all countries, including Canada, to stand in solidarity with Pakistan and with refugee hosting communities across the country to rebuild their lives, while mitigating against future climate shocks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We now go to questions by the members. For the first round, we have 4 minutes each. And Mr. Jenis, you are first.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, we were going to divide the time. Can you just clarify what you're doing? Is it just going to be 4 minutes and then a second round as well?
So for the first round, we'll have 4 minutes each for each question. And for the second round, we will have 3 minutes each.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
How much time for the second round?
3 minutes each.
Including us?
No, you would get a minute and a half. Sorry, Mr. Bishop.
What is the meaning of each?
So now my 5 minutes is starting now. Thank you, Chair. I know, I'm just kidding. I just very briefly on another matter wanted to put a notice of motion on the table. This is a notice of motion. I'm not moving it. It's that given disturbing revelations about corruption and multiple instances of sexual abuse at the World Health Organization and pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee conduct a study regarding corruption and abuse at the WHO and invite senior WHO leadership, including the Director General and also Dr. Agjamal Magtimova from the WHO Syrian office and Canada's Minister of International Development to provide testimony as part of this study. Okay. I wonder, Ms. Osman, if you could speak to the government's matching program and proposals that we've heard from other witnesses that the matching program be more inclusive so that donations to any organization working on these issues can benefit from that matching.
Yes, and I've watched some of the other witnesses and some of my peers talk about this, and so passionately yourself. We have urged the government to avoid this type of policy because we knew what it would cause. We knew that it meant that we would get certain calls requesting us to somehow magically become a part of that coalition so that we could also be matched. This creates an issue, not just at the fundraising level, but for us to quickly disperse funds, knowing that the government is behind us. I've heard from the previous testimony and directly from the ministry itself that pre-vetting is necessary because that is what the government has to do. But there are groups of us that have government funding. We work on several large projects, and we are pre-vetted, but we were still excluded from the matching fund, and that creates a whole other problem for us.
Is it your view that these funds could be dispersed in a fairer way without compromising speed? Because speed is obviously a major consideration.
Yes, I do, especially considering organizations that currently already have existing infrastructure and work in the regions that we're fundraising for.
You worked in response to the flood in 2010. Could you maybe compare this particular matching program to some of the program structures in 2010?
Of course. So in 2010, there was a Pakistan Relief Fund that all organizations had access to that were working in the region. This saw that there was a collaboration across the board, multilateral. Everyone felt that they were on an even playing field. But this year, there was an announcement of just $5 million from the government and then a matching fund for just a coalition of 12 members. So if you could imagine, that really excludes, upwards of 50 to 100 organizations. In 2010, that was not the case, and we saw that it was about $33 million that was matched in 2010, excuse me.
So you would have preferred if the government had simply used the pre-existing model that was used last time and used effectively rather than inventing a new model that was less fair and didn't work as well. Is that fair to say? Fair to say,
and we would have appreciated at least a reasoning behind the change that we all found was adequate, or at least invite us to the table to discuss it.
You didn't receive any reasoning in terms of why the government changed the model. Is it your view that in the model used in 2010 as a more inclusive model that it also got the money out quickly?
It did. We did not see any disruptions of funds being dispersed.
Okay, thank you. I think I've got about a minute left, Mr. Chair. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. We now go to Mr. Zuberi. You have 4 minutes, Mr. Zuberi.
I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here, Ms. Osman from IDRF and Ms. Imsis from UNHCR, and for the fantastic work that both of you and your organizations are doing. And I will share that I was in Pakistan in June of this year, prior to the news hitting and the intense flooding starting, but just seeing the beginning of the monsoons and some of the impacts around it. And myself, I'm half Pakistani, contrary to what people might think. I'm not full-blooded, I'm in part. But I was engaging with many Canadians of Pakistani origin who were speaking with me and trying to, have Canada, our country, do something for the flooding situation. I want to note that while in Pakistan, I saw many UNHCR tents along the roadside as I was traveling through the north, and many people were living immediately along highways in those tents that had UNHCR written all over them. We know that there are 1.4 million Afghans that are registered in Pakistan. Can you tell us how many registered and unregistered Afghans there are, and how this flooding situation further puts these refugees, not only Afghans, but all refugees, on the edge, literally and figuratively?
Question was for me.
Exactly.
And thank you for that question. Indeed, we have 1.3 million Afghans who are registered refugees with UNHCR. In addition to that, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 850,000 Afghans who carry something called an Afghan citizen card. And then we estimate another 600,000 or 700,000 Afghans are undocumented. So it's quite a substantial population in the country. And as I said in my opening remarks, they have been in large part there for over 40 years. Of course, we've had recent influxes and new flows of refugees coming into the country following the Taliban's takeover last August. But the conditions were quite dire to begin with. When you have a protracted displacement situation of this sort, which spans decades, it becomes very difficult to sustain donor support and donor funding for the operations in the country. And UNHCR has been there for over 40 years. So there have been many moments where we have struggled to fund the needs of those in the country consistently in a sustainable way.
I want to ask you about the security situation and how displacement and lack of security for refugees leads to insecurity and how that impacts the globe, including Western countries. If you can just think about that as you continue to answer.
So I'm not sure I follow the thread.
Basically, how insecurity, when people are living in extremely precarious situations, how that can lead to people latching on to inappropriate ideas and causes.
Well, certainly desperation drives people to do desperate things, and that can be any range of activities and things that certainly we wouldn't condone.
Would you say that's in Canada's direct interest that we ensure that people who are displaced are living with dignity and respect, and that will lead to international peace and further international peace and security?
Certainly, as a UN official, I will firmly stand behind the UN Charter and the principles in the Charter, which indeed call for, countries like Canada and all member states of the UN to honor their international obligations, but also to provide humanitarian support for emergencies as they arise.
Extremism and terrorism. Would you not agree to that?
Well, I would certainly say that hopelessness drives those sorts of activities and those sorts of phenomena. I mentioned in my remarks that child protection risks of sexual and gender-based violence are things that arise in emergency situations, not just in Pakistan, but around the world.
100%. Totally agree. And
we will now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 4 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. Thank you for being here today for the work that you do. The United Nations Program for Development on October 28th published an assessment of the damage and the losses in Pakistan following the flooding. This is an assessment that estimates that the total damage is over $14.9 million in losses, $15.2 billion in losses. The needs stand at $16.3 billion U.S. again. In an open letter from August 2022, the International Development and Relief Foundation is asking the Government of Canada to create a $50 million aid fund to fund humanitarian aid, immediate aid, and long-term assistance. Canada provides $33 million in response to the flooding and long-term recovery for Pakistan. First question is from Ms. Osman. I think $33 million, given the fact that we're talking about $50 million as a standard, does not seem sufficient to you. On the other hand, I'm wondering how you view this $50 million sum, this amount, and do you feel that this amount is adequate funding to help Canada get back on its feet following these difficult periods?
Thank you. I understand your question with regards to our open letter and the request to have the government aid be at $50 million as a relief fund where all organizations will be able to access that. And the reason we came to that number was the previous 2010 floods were seen at $33 million matched by Canadians who were looking to help along with the government. And this current flood is unprecedented. We see from international reports that they're estimating $10 billion in damages, and $50 million would just scratch the surface in being able to actually provide Pakistan with the help that they need over the next 2 to 3 years with rehabilitation. As my peer Rima here just mentioned, we're looking at health effects, right? We're looking at outbreaks of malaria. We're looking at destruction of homes and schools, displacement of refugees. So in our understanding, it's going to take much longer, coupled with inflation, rising fuel cost, rising cost of food. It's becoming increasingly difficult even for aid organizations to be able to source food for some of our programs. So that's really where our community of civil society organizations have come together to say that the least Canada could do is put together a fund of at least $50 million. And that's backed by a lot of international reports.
Mon collègue.
My colleague, Mr. Genis, was mentioning it a moment ago. You were de facto excluded from the Government of Canada's decision to match funds up to $7.5 million that was granted to the Humanitarian Coalition, which you're not a part of. Do you have the assurance that the Government of Canada, despite everything else, it will go through you for part of this funding announced to date?
Yes, I think from what I understand, whether or not we'd be a part of or access the funds that were announced today. So currently as it stands, no, we won't. Although we do work in conjunction with the government for other sorts of projects. But when it comes to the disaster relief for flooding in Pakistan, we, much like a lot of our peers, are not a part of that coalition where funds are being dispersed. And that's really the heart of our concerns, because it just means that there's less people being helped, essentially.
En marge de ce programme.
Aside from this matching program, these amounts provided by the public and a matching from the Canadian government, there are other amounts that are provided by the government directly. Do you receive these or part of these funds to help the people in Pakistan?
No, and a part of this comes with the crisis being current, which means that accessing those type of funds that are outside of the matching funds would mean putting together a proposal that may take a while through government assessment, which we simply can't afford to do. The work in which we do in this, and luckily the community support that we have, we've decided to move a lot quicker with our current means of using private funding to be able to address the current needs of the people of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. We now go to Ms. McPherson. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very interesting testimony. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Just to follow up on the last question, so in terms of the development dollars that you have received from the Government of Canada to do work in Pakistan, have you been able to use those dollars? Have you been able to get some mobility with your funding? Has Global Affairs Canada been allowed you that flexibility, knowing that one of the priorities of our development work is to address the needs of the most vulnerable?
Would be for me. We currently do not receive funding from the government for the Pakistan floods. Exactly. We do work with Global Affairs on other portfolios, but not the disaster relief in Pakistan.
So no, I didn't misunderstand that. So can you use the funds that you use for development projects in Pakistan? Can you divert that funding to projects that would support victims that are struggling with the flooding?
Now I
Able
understand.
to do
we
that?
are not. No, we are not able to do that. Yeah.
Have you asked?
We have not, but under the agreements in place, it would also take away from other projects that have taken a long time to put together.
That's true. Yeah, good point. Well, and this is one of my concerns when I hear about the matching program. You know, we do want Global Affairs to be flexible. We do want them to be responsive, particularly when we see things like what's happening in Pakistan, because of course these are not things that can be predicted to any degree of reliability. We do know that these are climate emergency responses to the climate crisis, and we do know that they will happen again. Where they will happen and what frequency is of course unknown. Now, the Government of Canada also has put forward $5.3 billion for climate financing. And when you speak about the match and the impacts that has had, the negative impacts that has had, I look at this 5.3, and the vast majority of it, of course, is going out to large multilateral organizations. It is not going to Canadian organizations or local organizations. Do you think that the way that $5.3 million is dispersed should also be reviewed and corrected to include more actors within Pakistan, within other countries?
You hit the nail on the head. Exactly. We do. We feel that a more collaborative approach, a more integrated approach would probably be the best case scenario for the government, because they could see the work being done in multiple areas through several different organizations, civil society organizations. It would mean that we could reach some of the goals of the international climate financing a lot quicker. So yes, I would say that our hope is that there's a review of all of these types of policies that would allow essentially more work to be done, because ultimately that's our goal at the International Development and Relief Foundation, is to be able to help more people.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess, I mean, my career prior to being in politics was in international development, and I know that the work that happens on the ground by Canadian organizations and by local organizations is so important. It's grounded in solidarity with the community. It's just so important, and I do worry when that development pie is not divided equitably to include organizations. So perhaps maybe I'll just finish by asking you, what is the impacts on your organization when Canada's global affairs efforts focus on multilaterals, to the exclusion of Canadian organizations? Obviously, multilateral organizations do great work.
Exactly. And I don't want to take away from the agencies that are doing fantastic work or our current partnerships with the government, but it just means that we could be doing more. And I think, like everyone else in this room, we're just asking the government to work with us to be able to do more.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We now go To Mr. Abul Taif, we have 3 minutes. Mr.
Thank you.
Abul Taif.
Good to see you both, Zaina and Arima, if I may call it by first name. Arima, you mentioned about the Afghan refugees in Pakistan. Do you have current numbers of refugees registered and non-registered?
I gave those numbers in response to your colleague as well, and I'm happy to repeat them. 1.3 million are registered with UNHCR or with the government of Pakistan. 840,000 carry a card that identifies them as Afghan citizens, and a further 800,000 is an estimate of the undocumented Afghans currently residing in Pakistan.
So the one registered are registered with UNHCR or?
And the government of Pakistan.
Okay. Geographically, are they located in the flood area?
Indeed, they are. 2/3, or rather close to 70%, are currently residing in what the government has declared calamity-hit districts.
So what happened to these people? Where have they been relocated?
I'm sorry?
They've been relocated to different areas within the country? Is that
What's
correct?
happened is that we, along with our humanitarian partners, have established relief sites, places where people can sleep. We've converted other installations or facilities into temporary shelters. We have also distributed forms of temporary shelter, like tents, like other more substantial structures called refugee housing units, which we use more for programming than for residing in. So we're providing things of that nature to help people with temporary shelter until we can rehabilitate their homes and the infrastructure that's been damaged. This is all, I should say, under the direct leadership of the government of Pakistan. The humanitarian organizations working in country are doing so under the coordination and leadership of the government.
So this current situation of the Afghani refugees within Pakistan during this crisis must have affected the Canadian approach to also as far as Afghanistan. As far as resources, financial resources, and other resources, how did that impact Canadian policy as far as Afghanistan?
Not sure I understand the question. Are you asking me whether Canada has allocated additional funding for the Afghan response, or?
Well, I'm saying what the takeaway from this current situation on the Afghan mission as far as Canada's perspective.
Certainly, Canada has come forward as a donor and contributed to the emergency relief efforts in Pakistan. And Canada continues to be a donor, a humanitarian donor, for the operation in Afghanistan. So we treat those as two separate emergencies, and they're very different in nature. And also in terms of those who are impacted. So Canada remains a donor to UNHCR and other UN agencies and humanitarian partners who are operating in both countries.
So have you seen any... sorry, thank you.
We now go to Mr. Sarai.
Thank you. I want to thank you both for all your efforts in the flood-ridden areas of Pakistan. My question is more with respect to women and girls. We know in disaster-hit areas, women and girls are disproportionately affected, statistically more likely to die as well than their counterparts. How many women and girls have been affected by the extreme flooding in Pakistan? Either one?
That 2/3 of those impacted are women and children.
And in terms of deaths, or in terms of disproportionately injury, malnourishment, other issues?
Well, we anticipated that women and children would be disproportionately impacted, which it's a cycle and a pattern we see repeated in other emergencies. And for that reason, we took preventative measures at the outset to deploy female staff to areas so that they can hear directly from women what the needs are that may not be communicated through other channels. We've also made sure that our facilities that we've constructed for water and sanitation are gender segregated to protect women. ensured we have lighting at water points. I mean, we are very well aware of the risks to women and children in these kinds of emergencies as they are repeated elsewhere in the globe. So as a matter of course, we take preventative measures at the outset in our response to ensure that we mitigate that to the extent possible.
Are you prioritizing that in other responses around the world, like when it happens? Okay. I want to go on to the Afghan refugees that are there. You've kind of outlined how many are there. What's the support networks that they are receiving while they're they're refugees already, and on top of that, they're dealing with floods and other things. Are they still being prioritized equally, or are they put behind in the humanitarian efforts to those that are of Pakistani origin?
From the perspective of UNHCR, we are prioritizing both nationals, Pakistani nationals, as well as refugees. Our agency is mandated to provide protection and support to refugees, so our response efforts have been concentrated in areas with high population numbers of refugees. Because they've been there for over 4 decades, we know where they are, and we have established networks, and we've been providing services and support for over 40 years. So that has continued throughout this process. Of course, the only thing that limits us is the amount of resources and funding available to respond to those needs. So the more we have, the more people we can assist.
Earlier, we had heard from the Minister of International Development that had stated, I'll be very quick, that it didn't get the limelight or the attention that it needed. Can you speak to that in terms of Pakistan? Did they get the attention in this catastrophe as they deserved?
I think initial indications were strong signs of solidarity and support, but with any emergency, the more protracted it becomes, the more crises you see globally, the harder it is to sustain that kind of attention. So that's why we continue to issue these calls for support and solidarity, particularly with a country that's generously hosted a large refugee population for several decades.
Thank you, Mr. Fry. We now go to Mr. Bergeron. A minute and a half, sir.
Thank you. In calling for additional support, the High Commissioner has said that Pakistan is a hot point climactically, and that there needs to be reinforced measures to mitigate the effects of any future climate disasters, extreme climate issues. What do you think needs to be done to limit these events in the future in countries like Pakistan, and what can Canada do? That was the High Commissioner for Refugees.
To the comments of the Secretary General Antonio Guterres following his visit to the country in late September, as I outlined in my remarks, really it's about doing business a little bit differently. It's about creating climate-resistant structures. It's about building back better. The UN, the EU, the World Bank, and the Asian Development Bank just a few days ago issued their initial post-disaster needs assessment. And one of the main calls is to ensure that as we build back and we reconstruct, this is quite a substantial endeavor, we do that with climate resistance technologies, climate resistance principles in mind. As you heard from my colleague on the panel, we know this is going to happen again. These areas that have been hit by floods only last year were suffering from mild to severe drought. So we know that climate unpredictability and extreme weather events are going to continue. So part of our response has to include a substantial portion, I would say, ensuring that whatever we build back is as climate resistant as possible.
Yes. To Ms. McPherson, please. A minute and a half.
That's quite a short amount of time. I would also like to ask some questions from the HCR, Ms. MCC. I'm sorry, I've probably pronounced that incorrectly. Knowing that climate financing is so vital, and knowing that climate emergencies are increasing and are increasingly going to be one of the key ways that we are going to have to respond with regards to development, with regards to humanitarian aid, there has been some criticism on the use of debt and equity financing as opposed to grant financing. Can you comment on that, please?
Well, certainly we're moving in the direction of relying more and more on international financial institutions and development actors to help support these efforts. You know, immediate humanitarian needs are something my organization deals with. But when it becomes medium to longer term reconstruction, rehabilitation, initiatives of this sort, we rely on other actors to come in, like the World Bank of the, and the IMF and other institutions. So certainly longer term development models of financing, whether through loans or grants, those are things that I think are better answered by officials who work in this space. But certainly, when you have a situation like this of such colossal damage, I think anything we can do to avoid further entrenching debt and poverty and creating more hardship as a country tries to emerge from a disaster like this, we would certainly be in support of.
And typically those countries that do struggle, that are more vulnerable to climate emergencies, are those countries that have a higher debt, that struggle under debt repayment already. So this complicates that even more. One of the things that you also picked up on, and I think is very, very important, and I've said it many times here, is the development is a long-term game, and it's that predictable funding. It is the knowing that the funding is there, the predictable partnerships and the predictable funding that is so very vital to be effective. Is that a correct statement? Is that a correct statement from your perspective?
Considerably so. We now go to the last two questions. Mr. Hoback, under 3 minutes, please.
In the last 30 seconds. Sure. Time. I want to pick up where the NDP member picked off, and that's where I struggle with. I'm talking to some ambassadors, and one of the comments they make to me is when they're in a situation of normalcy, the programs we offer out of Canada are good programs, and they're behind them. But when you get in a situation like we have in Pakistan, they still put the same requirements on the programs during normalcy. So how do you take a scenario and say, we're going to do this project, when actually all you need is food, water, medications, the bare essentials to get these people through the crisis? So why can't you take those funds from existing programs in the short term to immediately respond in that way? What's holding you back?
That's a great question. And certainly with our private funders, we are able to quickly decide based on a needs assessment, and we do move to emergency response immediately. Although we do try and have multi-phase sort of response in place, luckily for us, we're working in a lot of these regions already, and so some of the project work that we do is pretty easy to shift and change, make sure that you're meeting the needs of food and health and water. However, when it comes to government funding, it isn't that simple to be able to shift some of the funding to emergency response, and that'll have to be a question for the government, really, about some of their funding models and programs and projects. But we certainly are in support of a lot of that flexibility to be able to have the autonomy to make the decisions to move funds to where necessary, for sure.
I'm sorry,
No problem. Thanks.
Thank you for the rest of your time. And just as we approach the end of the meeting, Mr. Chair, I wanted to move a motion I have on notice. I don't think it's a controversial one, but it's the committee report to the House that it calls on the government to fix the barriers that are preventing vital humanitarian aid from getting into Afghanistan, and ask the government to provide the committee with regular written updates on its progress and intended timelines. This follows some testimony that we've heard as part of this study, as well as obviously concerns about the information that we're getting from other sources. So I wanted to move that motion now, and hopefully we'll be able to move it forward quickly. Thank you, Chair.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I'm looking for clarification from the clerk because this meeting is on Haiti and Pakistan. I just wonder if it is within scope to bring a motion that I don't believe was circulated to committee members or put on notice.
It was on notice. It was on notice, yeah.
Yes.
It is in order.
It's in order because there was 48 hours provided.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Yes, Mr. Zuberi.
I'd like to amend the motion.
Yes.
I think the motion is really good and positive. The heart of it is exactly as we should. This is what we should be pursuing. I would just suggest that we remove the reporting portion towards the end of the motion, but otherwise this is good, and this is where we should be going as a committee. And I move that amendment to strike out that last portion that I defined.
Sorry, just for greater clarity, so what are you removing?
So I don't actually have the motion text in front of me, but it's the last portion that makes reference to the reporting. Otherwise, keep the whole thing intact as it is. The heart of it, which is the heart of it, which is what we should be doing. So essentially, from the comma onward, regular written updates.
That's reasonable.
Sorry, you want to take out regular written updates?
Yeah, so we'll keep that the committee report to the House that it calls upon the Government of Canada to fix the barriers, excellent, that are preventing vital humanitarian aid. I think we can all agree to that, from getting into Afghanistan. And just put a period there.
Mr. Chair, just on a point of order, because of time, I'm willing to accept that if we're able to just adopt the amendment in the motion unanimously, because I know we're up against time. So.
So should everyone agree, just in terms of the valuable time of the two witnesses who have been with us for the last hour? If members agree, I think we can release them, so to speak. But we do so thanking them for the incredible work that they're doing and for the expertise that you shared with us today. Thank you very much for everything you're doing. So, yes, Mr. Genis.
Yeah, so I just, if there's unanimous consent to agree, and in the interest of time, I will accept Mr. Zuberi's amendment if we can adopt the amendment and the motion unanimously, and that's just to remove all of the words after the word Afghanistan. That's the amendment, as I understand it, and so I'm happy to accept that so that we can bring this to a landing.
Just for those members who may not have a copy of the motion as amended, it now reads that the committee report to the House that it calls on the Government of Canada to fix the barriers that are preventing vital humanitarian aid from getting into Afghanistan, period. So do we want to put it to a vote, or
Yes.
do we want to unanimously? Yes?
I'll
Okay.
ask if anybody disagrees.
Can we vote on division, please?
Then we have UC. But
one of the members asked for a vote on division.
Okay, let's vote then.
So the vote is on the amendment.
Who's voting on behalf of the Liberal?
Yes, on the amendment.
Who's voting on behalf of the Liberal Party? 'Cause we got-
Madame Bendayan.
Oui.
Dr. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. McKay. Mr. Sarai.
Yes.
Mr. Zuberi.
Yes.
Mr. Abultaif.
Yes.
Mr. Epp.
No.
Mr. Genis.
Yes.
Mr. Aubac.
Yes.
Monsieur Bergeron. Ms. McPherson.
Yes.
Yeas 11, nays 1.
Thank you very much. So that's been adopted. Absolutely. If I could just have everyone's attention for approximately 2 minutes, just a couple of housekeeping things. Oh, we still have to vote on the amendment. No, that was the amendment.
So the vote.
So now we have to vote on the amended motion, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yes, we did.
So the vote is on the motion as amended. Madame Bendayan.
Oui.
Dr. Fry.
You can apply.
Yes.
Mr. McKay. Mr. Sarai.
Yes.
Mr. Zuberi.
Yes.
Mr. Abultaif.
Yes.
Mr. Epp,
Yes.
Mr. Janice,
Yes.
Mr. Aubac,
Yes.
Monsieur Bergeron, Ms. McPherson.
Yes.
Yeas 11, nays 0.
Thank you. So that's been adopted. Now, if I could just have a couple of minutes of your time, hopefully. There's a few pressing issues we have to deal with. The first is drafting instructions. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, if we could, I will adjourn for 10 seconds. Suspend it?
Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering, it is now past 6:30 and we are going to move in camera, which we know takes 10 minutes, and
Is it
then
gonna take
it'll
10
be.
minutes?
Mr. Chair, it is the end of our scheduled meeting. I don't.
Yes, but as you know, we need to, sure, if you guys want, we will adjourn this meeting, but we will.
Okay. Is it appropriate to send various suggestions regarding drafting by email?
Yes,
Is that
please, absolutely. That would be
unprecedented,
very
or-
much welcome, actually.
Okay. So we can each send thoughts to the clerk on drafting, and then they can provide those to the analysts to incorporate. Is that agreeable, or does that work? Okay.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président. De quoi
Point of order. What did you want to discuss in camera, Mr. Chair? Instructions to the analysts?
For the flooding in Pakistan report, just so the analysts would know and they could move this forward. So it's
les
just a-
analystes ont déjà des idées?
I think the analysts already have the ideas and the plan, right?
and the analysts who could provide us with the options, but it seems like the members.
Just do it.
Fair enough. So you could just proceed with that. There is one more issue, and we don't necessarily have to do this in camera. Just want to confirm that it is the will of the committee that in the context of Bill S-223, the deadline for the submission of amendments to the clerk of the committee be no later than noon on Thursday, November 10th, 2022. Is everyone in favor unanimously on that issue? Yes, Mr. Bergeron.
Corrigez-moi.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chair, but I kind of get the feeling here that we're being asked for proposed amendments when we haven't finished hearings. Am I correct, or am I mistaken?
I think we ran out of time. Yes. I have to go.
So the only reason that this issue does arise is because, as you will recall, in the last meeting, we adopted the calendar for November. So we're left in this awkward position, which generally is not what does it.
Non seulement étrange.
It's not only strange, it's really unhealthy for us to presume what we'll be hearing in witness testimony before we hear what we're supposed to hear in order to bring proposed amendments forward.
With all due respect, the motion was put before all the members, and members did vote in favor, not having thought of the implications that would have. Yes, Mr. Janice.
If it's helpful, just to make a comment on Bill S-223, I am of the view that this bill can be studied and proceeded with relatively quickly because it's been studied on multiple occasions by committees in the House and the Senate. This committee in the House previously studied this bill and amended it, and the form that we are receiving it in from the Senate in this Parliament is identical to the form as it was amended by a previous version of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So, I'm a little biased. It's a bill that I'm sponsoring, but this bill, having gone through about 5 different versions in different parliaments over 15 years, I think the argument for a somewhat more expedited timeline around hearings on this is that there's extensive testimony and discussion of it in previous parliaments. So while I would generally agree with the principle of the argument Mr. Bergeron is making in context where it's a new bill, I think the process it makes sense in the context of a bill that frankly, that every time it's been voted on, everybody's agreed to, but that has nonetheless not managed to complete its legislative journey in 15 years.
Okay. So did members want, yes, Mr. Zuberi.
So I just I want us to take note of what Mr. Jenna said about how this has been discussed many times, but my understanding is normally this is discussed in camera, so I move to adjourn.
Thank you. Meeting stands adjourned.